Well, hello and welcome to our GCSE revision on Christian views of sex, marriage, the family and divorce. We've got a lot to get through, so let's get stuck in. One of the first things we need to get straight in our head when we're talking about the family and divorce and sex and sexuality is that Christians have a very different view of love than the view of love that you'll be used to when you look at contemporary entertainment or contemporary society. I think that most people today will have a view of love that views love as a feeling, a very powerful, irrational force that motivates us to do crazy and strange things, or that makes us completely obsessed with another person. And love is a feeling, and our feelings are something that we simply cannot control, so people cannot help who they fall in love with. Christianity will look at things very differently, and we'll go back to look at the Bible's view of love. The greatest view of love that we have in the Bible is Jesus giving his life for others. No greater love has anyone than this, than he gives his life for his friends, Jesus will say in the Gospel of John. And love in Christianity is something that goes well beyond what we feel. Love is about what we will be prepared to do for another person. So love is about what we will be prepared to sacrifice for another. Love is about what you are prepared to give up for another person. It certainly involves feelings, but there's more to love than what you feel. So if you read 1 Corinthians 13, it's going to say that love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, it does not delight in evil but rejoices with the truth, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. In other words, if you genuinely love someone, it's going to change who you are as a person towards them. It's going to make you kinder towards them. But above all, you're going to value that person more than you value yourself. And love will change your character. So love goes way beyond the romantic feelings you have towards another person. It's going to be about sacrifice and service to that other person. If you want to measure how much you love another person, don't think in terms of what you feel about them. Measure your love in what you'd be prepared to give up for them. And similarly, if you want to know, does someone love you, do not think in terms of, well, what does that person feel about me? Think in terms of, well, what would that person be prepared to give up for me? What would that person be prepared to sacrifice for me? Well, if we look at what Jesus teaches about marriage, and of course marriage is going to involve love, Jesus in Matthew 19 says, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. So there you have Jesus responding to some questions that people have asked him about his views on divorce. And he says that marriage is about one man and one woman coming together. And when you have put them together, no one should separate them. In fact, anyone who divorces his wife commits adultery. Now that's quite a strong view of marriage. In Jesus' day, divorces for men were quite easy to obtain. A man could divorce his wife if there are two witnesses there. Ideally, he would provide his wife with some sort of certificate to prove that she was divorced and therefore could remarry. Jesus in those verses is saying that any man who divorces his wife, unless there's been some sort of sexual immorality on her part, is committing adultery. This is a sinful thing to do, Jesus is saying. And Jesus in that text is going back to the view of marriage that's given in the first chapters of the Bible, that's given in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. In Genesis chapter 1, it says that God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and told them to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. So marriage is something that's given for procreation, for increasing the number of humans in the earth. But God also says in Genesis chapter 2, it's not good for a man to be alone, so he's going to make a helper to be suitable for him. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, so they will become one flesh. And this idea of a man and a woman coming together permanently is something that's central to the Christian idea of marriage. Of course, Christianity is not unique in wanting to honour and protect the custom and the institution of marriage. And that is because it takes one man and one woman to make a child, and every human being that has been born throughout history has had a biological father and a biological mother, with one exception if you're a Christian and if you believe in the virgin birth. Otherwise, everyone has a biological father and a biological mother. We also know that children, unless the situation is abusive, will prefer to have their mother and father live together and with them and to live in a good relationship, because that's important to our sense of identity, and it also takes a huge amount of work to raise a child, so it's quite good if the father is invested in the children that he has had with the mother and can help raise them together. And so we have this institution of marriage which tries to keep men and women together, because when men and women are together, they can make a child. And children need love, and they need care, and they need attention, and they want their parents to be together. Now, that is not to say that marriage is about making children. And one mistake that students quite often make when they're answering questions on the Christian view of sex is to say something like, well, Christians believe that sex is just there to make a child. That's simply not true. That's not something that's taught in the Bible. Sex and sexuality are given for a number of reasons. Now, one reason is for procreation. At the end of the day, that's why sex is there, is to make new human beings. But children, as we have mentioned, need a lot of love and need a lot of attention if they're going to thrive, if they're going to grow. And so sex is not just about making children in the sense of reproduction, in the sense of making new biological units. It is about attracting a man and a woman together so that they can stay together and love one another. And it's that bond that makes a marriage. Now, hopefully the two will be able to go on to have children. Hopefully they'll be young enough. Hopefully they will be healthy enough to have new children. But still, if a man and a woman are prepared to stay together for the rest of their life in one faithful union, then Christians will honour that as a marriage and say that that is a true marriage. So Christians have even honoured deathbed marriages where a man and a woman, if one of them's dying, will be allowed to be married, even though you know there's definitely going to be no children because one person is about to die. And the reason for that is a lifelong union of a woman and a man till death do us part. And that's something that we want to honour and to protect. And that's something that we want to promote, because that lifelong union of a man and a woman is what Christians believe is necessary for bringing about the next generation in the best way possible. This is why every society throughout history has tried to honour this permanent union of a man and a woman. We are saying that marriage is much more than just a domestic living relationship, the sort of a deal that people come up with when they want to live together and stay together. And it's why marriage is honoured more than a lifelong friendship, for example. Marriage is honoured because a man and a woman together can create the next generation, and it's very important to raise that next generation correctly. And the only way to do that is through love. And love is about commitment, and love is about sacrifice. And so marriage, in a way, teaches men and women that they must be able to love one another and make sacrifices for one another and commit to one another before they're ready to raise that next generation. That's what marriage is about, not only in the Christian view, but in the traditional view. Now, one criticism of that view that you might want to mention is that certain people can be left out. So, for example, same-sex partnerships are excluded by this view of marriage. Now, I want to make it clear here, we're not just talking about the Christian view of marriage or the traditional Christian view of marriage. Practically every traditional view of marriage, Jewish, ancient Greek, ancient Roman, Islamic, Hindu, the whole way throughout history and around the world has viewed marriage as one man and one woman. But a criticism of that view is it leaves out certain people. Certain people can't get married. Now, those who defend the traditional view of marriage will respond and say, well, look, marriage is just not about romance. It's not about romantic attraction. It's not about lifelong partnerships. It's about teaching men and women how they should relate and how we should bring about the next generation of human beings. You can argue either side in your paper. It's worth having a think about where you stand on that issue. Those who believe in religious texts, Christians who believe the Bible is the Word of God, might be led in a particular way because the Bible seems to come down against same-sex relationships and certainly against same-sex marriages. That's the way it certainly seems. But then it's worth keeping in mind that the Bible has an extremely high standard. The Bible seems to be against divorce, full stop. It seems to want to go for this till death do us part idea. So when we're looking at what Jesus said, he said, look, it's a sin. It is a sin simply to get divorced, unless there's been something like marital unfaithfulness. Now, it's important to remember that Christians have different points of view on divorce. The Roman Catholic Church would put down divorce as always wrong. It allows for annulments. It allows for situations where people can argue that, look, we were never properly married in the first place. Perhaps somebody was coerced into the marriage, or somebody was bullied into the marriage, or somebody was drunk when they got married. If you can show the church that you did not give your proper informed consent to the marriage, you could argue to the church, we were never properly married, and the church will annul your relationship. It won't divorce you, but it will allow you to have an annulment. But generally, the Roman Catholic Church views divorce as wrong. And a lot of traditional Protestant churches would agree with that position. In the Baptist churches and the Brethren churches that I was raised in, divorce was viewed as something that was just always wrong. It had an even stricter view than the Catholic Church because it didn't allow for annulments. It didn't allow for somebody to come in and say, look, I was coerced into this marriage, or I was drunk when I got married. You made the vow, you're in that marriage for life. Presbyterian Christians, sometimes called Reformed Christians, but Presbyterians would take a different view, and they would say, look at what Jesus said. He said, anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness commits adultery. There are brackets there. There's an exception clause where Jesus was saying, well, look, in certain circumstances, divorce isn't a sin. And Presbyterians have generally held the three conditions there. If there's desertion, if one partner leaves the other, if there's abuse, where one partner has effectively deserted the other by physically or emotionally abusing them, or if there's adultery, then divorce can take place. But in any case, marriage is a lifelong commitment in Christianity. It's also monogamous. It doesn't allow for, unlike Islam, polygamy. In Islam, one man can marry up to 4 wives, although it very, very rarely happens, and monogamy is preferred. But at the end of the day, there's these very high standards in Christianity, which some people would argue are made even worse by the fact that sex is to take place in marriage and only within marriage. So therefore, if you are not married to someone, you cannot have sex with them. And some people say, look, this is an absurdly high standard, especially in the modern world when we have such, cheap and easily available contraception. Why do we have to live up to this standard? Christians will reply to that, well, Jesus said following him was going to be difficult. He said, if you want to follow me, take up your cross and follow me. In other words, following me is going to involve a struggle, and it's going to involve sacrifice, and it's going to involve service. And there are also the advantages of not having to worry about sexually transmitted diseases, knowing who your children are, and having a very high view and a loving view of what your marriage is about.